The crash of porcelain against marble was the only sound that ever truly filled the house. It was a sharp, violent punctuation in a silence otherwise composed of whispers and the distant hum of security systems. Cassandra did not flinch. She set down her bucket, the water sloshing gently against the sides, and retrieved a dustpan and brush from her cart. 20 years of fury were coiled in the man who sat in the center of the vast, sun-drenched room, a king on a throne of chrome and leather, and today that fury was aimed at a bowl of lukewarm soup. Mr. Min-jun watched her with eyes like chips of obsidian, his face a mask of controlled contempt. His hands, the only part of him from the waist down that still obeyed his commands with seamless grace, were clenched on the wheels of his chair. He had the powerful, sculpted torso of a man who spent hours a day fighting the atrophy that had claimed his legs. The rest of him was a monument to a single, catastrophic moment on a rain-slicked road 2 decades ago. Cassandra knelt, her large, soft body a contrast to the hard, unforgiving lines of the room. She swept the shards of the bowl, then the scattered vegetables, her movements methodical and calm. She did not look at him, but she could feel his gaze burning into the top of her head. "Leave it," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly thing that held the permanent rasp of disuse and authority. "The others will clean it," she continued her work, sweeping the last of the mess into the pan. "The others are busy with the West Wing, sir. And it's a hazard. Someone could slip." He hated that. The quiet, unassailable logic. The way she refused to be intimidated by his rages or his reputation. He was the head of the city's most feared criminal syndicate, a man whose name was spoken with a mixture of reverence and terror. Yet this woman, this plus-sized, unassuming American maid, treated him as if he were just a messy tenant. He wheeled his chair closer, the quiet whir of the motor, an animal growl. "Look at me when I speak to you." Cassandra rose slowly, her knees protesting quietly, and finally met his gaze. Her own eyes were a warm, deep brown, and they held no fear, only a kind of weary patience. "Yes, sir? You are not paid to think. You are paid to do as you are told." "I said leave it, and I'm telling you, sir, that a slippery floor is a problem for everyone, including you." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before the mask slammed back down. What she did not know was that the last person who had spoken to him with such simple defiance was now a ghost, a memory buried under 20 years of pain and regret. Welcome to our channel. If you enjoy stories about unexpected connections and the strength of the human heart, be sure to subscribe. Now let us get into it. Cassandra was not brave, not in the way of heroes and stories. Her courage was of a quieter, more practical sort. It was the courage of a 25-year-old single mother who took a job cleaning the mansion of a notorious gangster because the pay was triple what she could make anywhere else, and her daughter, Chloe, needed new shoes and a safe place to sleep. She had been warned. The agency had been blunt. "He is a difficult man," the prim woman had said, peering at Cassandra over her glasses. "He goes through staff faster than he goes through physical therapists," but Cassandra had a 6-year-old with a smile that could melt glaciers and a laugh that was the only music that mattered. So she took the job. She moved into the small, clean apartment over the garages, a space that was larger and safer than any home she and Chloe had ever known. She learned the geography of the mansion, with its sterile, museum-like rooms and its silent, dark-suited men who moved like shadows along the walls. And she learned the geography of Mr. Min-jun's moods. His silences were more dangerous than his shouting. His stillness was a prelude to some internal storm. But Chloe, in the way of children, saw none of that. To her, the mansion was a castle, and Mr. Min-jun was a grumpy king. One afternoon, while Cassandra was polishing the already gleaming floors of the main hall, Chloe slipped away from her coloring books. She padded in her small pink sneakers right up to the wheelchair where Min-jun was reading a financial report. He did not notice her until a small hand tugged on his sleeve. He looked down, his scowl deepening. "What do you want?" Chloe held up a piece of paper. It was a crayon drawing of 2 figures. One was a big, smiling woman with curly hair. The other was a man with stick legs, also smiling. She pointed a tiny finger at the man. "That's you," she said with the unshakable confidence of a 6-year-old. "You're walking." Min-jun stared at the drawing. The crude lines, the impossible hope of it. He felt a crack appear in the ice that had encased his heart for 2 decades. "I do not walk," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. Chloe just shook her head, her pigtails bouncing. "Not yet," she said. "But you will." A man named Tae-woo watched this interaction from the shadows of a far doorway. He was Min-jun's second-in-command, a man with a serpent smile and an ambition that was a living, breathing thing inside him. He had been with Min-jun for years, his loyalty a carefully constructed performance. He saw the child, the maid, and the drawing not as a moment of innocent connection, but as a weakness. A variable he had not accounted for. Min-jun was becoming soft. This woman and her child were a disease, an infection of sentimentality in a world that did not allow for it. Tae-woo made it his business to understand vulnerabilities. He approached Cassandra a few days later while she was tending to the small rose garden she had planted in a neglected corner of the estate. Chloe was chasing butterflies nearby. "You've made quite an impression on the boss," Tae-woo said, his voice smooth as polished stone. He did not smile, but his eyes did, and it was not a pleasant sight. Cassandra stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "I just do my job, Mr. Tae-woo. He seems calmer since you arrived. Less prone to breaking things." He gestured vaguely toward the house. "That is good for business." "A calm mind makes better decisions," he paused, letting the silence stretch. "But it can also be a distraction. Attachments are liabilities in our world." The threat was veiled, but it was as clear as a knife held to her throat. She instinctively glanced at Chloe, who was now crouched down, examining a ladybug on a leaf. "I don't know what you mean." "I'm his maid." Tae-woo took a step closer. His cologne was expensive and suffocating. "Let me be clear. Your daughter is a lovely girl. It would be a shame if this environment became unsafe for her. Perhaps you could keep me informed of the boss's moods, his plans. A little insurance policy. For her future, Cassandra felt a cold dread wash over her, but her voice was steady when she replied. "Mr. Min-jun pays me to clean his house. He doesn't pay me to be a spy." Tae-woo's expression hardened. "That is a mistake," he said softly, before turning and walking away, his expensive shoes silent on the grass. That night, Cassandra held Chloe a little tighter, the scent of her daughter's shampoo a fragile shield against the creeping darkness of the house. The small drawing Chloe had made found a home. Min-jun, in a moment of uncharacteristic impulse, had taken it from the child, and later, when he was alone in his vast, silent office, he had taped it to the corner of his monolithic desk monitor. The smiling stick figure with its impossible, walking legs stared back at him. It was a mockery, a child's fantasy, and yet, he could not bring himself to throw it away. He found his eyes drifting to it during long conference calls and tense negotiations. He started to see Cassandra not just as a functionary, a pair of hands to clean up his messes, but as the woman who had raised this fearless, hopeful child. He watched her on the security monitors, a habit he developed to keep track of everyone in his domain. He saw her patience with Chloe, the way she would stop her work to answer a question or tie a shoe. He saw the gentle way she moved, the quiet dignity in her posture. He saw the strength she tried so hard to hide. One evening, she brought him his dinner tray. He had dismissed the cook for the night. "You don't need to do that," he said, his tone clipped. "It's not part of your duties. The kitchen was clean, and I was making something for Chloe anyway." "It's no trouble," she replied, setting the tray on the table beside his chair. It was a simple meal. Soup, bread, nothing like the elaborate dishes his chef usually prepared. He picked up the spoon. The soup was hot, perfectly seasoned. It tasted like home, a concept he had forgotten. He ate in silence, aware of her standing by the door, waiting to take the tray. "Why do you stay here?" he asked suddenly, his back to her. She was quiet for a moment. "The pay is good. It's safe for my daughter. You are not afraid of me?" he asked, still not turning. He heard her take a small breath. "I'm more afraid of not being able to feed my child than I am of a man in a wheelchair." The honesty of it struck him, sharp and clean. It was the first honest thing anyone had said to him in years. He turned his chair to face her. For the first time, he truly looked at her, not as staff, but as a person. He saw the weariness around her eyes, but also the fierce, protective fire within them. "Your daughter," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. "She is a good girl," a small, genuine smile touched Cassandra's lips. Yes, sir. She is. The pressure from Taewoo escalated. It was subtle at first. A misplaced tool. A favorite vase of Cassandra's found shattered on the floor, presented as an accident. Then, one of Chloe's toys, a small stuffed bear she couldn't sleep without, went missing. It reappeared a day later on the doorstep of their apartment, soaking wet and covered in mud. There was no direct accusation, no proof, but Cassandra knew. It was a message, a reminder of her daughter's vulnerability. She considered leaving, packing their few belongings and running in the middle of the night. But where would they go? Back to the cramped apartment with the leaky ceiling and the neighbors who fought all night? Back to a life of scraping by, where one missed paycheck meant disaster. Here, despite the cold luxury and the undercurrent of danger, Chloe had a yard to play in. She had good food and a warm bed. And Cassandra was beginning to realize a strange and unsettling truth. The safest place in the entire city might just be beside the most dangerous man in it. She had to tell him. It was a terrifying thought. Admitting that his second-in-command was threatening her could get her killed. Saying nothing felt even more dangerous. She found him in the library, a cavernous room lined with books he would never pull from the shelves. The air smelled of leather and dust. Mr. Minjun, she began, her heart pounding against her ribs. I need to talk to you. He looked up from his laptop, his expression impassive. Speak, she told him everything. About Taewoo's veiled threats, about the broken vase, about Chloe's mud-stained bear. She kept her voice even, presenting the facts without emotion, as if she were reporting a spill on the carpet. When she finished, the silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Minjun said nothing for a long time. He simply stared at a point on the far wall, his jaw tight. Cassandra's courage began to falter. Had she made a terrible mistake? Was he angry with her for bringing him this problem? Finally, he looked at her. His eyes were cold, but it was the cold of deep space, not of anger. It was the cold of calculation. Show me the bear, he said. She retrieved it from their apartment. It was still damp, a pathetic, ruined thing. He took it from her, his long, elegant fingers turning it over, examining the dirt caked in its fur. Thank you for telling me, Cassandra, he said, his voice quiet. You will continue your duties as normal. Do not speak of this to anyone. You and the girl will not be harmed. I promise you this. It was not a comforting reassurance. It was a statement of fact, a law of nature he had just decreed. Here is the part of the story you need to understand. For 20 years, Minjun had ruled his empire from a wheelchair, but his mind had never been crippled. He saw patterns others missed. He heard the lies tucked between truths. He had suspected Taewoo's ambition for years, watching it grow like a cancer within his organization. He had been waiting, patiently, for Taewoo to make a mistake, to overplay his hand. And by threatening a maid and her child, Taewoo had done just that. He had mistaken a quiet, principled woman for a pawn, and in doing so, he had revealed his own profound weakness. He had fundamentally misunderstood the man he served. Minjun made 2 phone calls. The first was short, a string of commands in Korean, delivered in a monotone. The second was to the head of his security detail, a loyal man named Mr. Park who had been with him since before the accident. Stay with the woman and her child, Minjun ordered. Do not let them out of your sight. If anyone, and I mean anyone, tries to approach them, you know what to do. The next day, Taewoo requested a meeting. He entered Minjun's office with his usual confident swagger, a portfolio under his arm. Boss, he began, I have the quarterly reports you asked for, and a proposal for the harbor expansion. Sit down, Taewoo, Minjun said, his voice dangerously soft. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Taewoo sat, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. On the corner of Minjun's desk, the child's drawing of the walking man was still taped to the monitor. Minjun wheeled his chair around the desk until he was directly in front of Taewoo. You have been a valuable asset for many years, Minjun began. Loyal. Efficient. But loyalty has an expiration date, doesn't it? When ambition grows too large to be contained, Taewoo's face paled. Boss, I don't know what you're talking about. You threatened a civilian, Minjun continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. A woman under my protection. You threatened her child. You did this in my house. You thought I had grown weak. You thought a man who cannot walk cannot reach out and crush the life from a snake. He leaned forward. You are wrong. Two of Minjun's most formidable men entered the room silently, positioning themselves behind Taewoo's chair. Taewoo started to rise, but a heavy hand on his shoulder pushed him back down. His swagger was gone, replaced by raw, primal fear. He finally understood. The maid wasn't a weakness. She was a trigger. The aftermath was silent and swift.
Taewoo disappeared.
No one asked where he went. His name was never spoken in the house again. The quiet, oppressive tension that had settled over the mansion lifted, replaced by the old, familiar silence of Minjun's solitary reign. But something had changed. A debt had been incurred, and a promise had been made. Minjun felt the weight of it. He had protected Cassandra and Chloe, but it was their vulnerability that had given him the weapon he needed to excise Taewoo. He had used her. He called her to his office that evening. She entered quietly, her hands clasped in front of her, her face calm but weary. "It is done," he said, by way of explanation. "You and Chloe are safe." "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He gestured to the chair Taewoo had occupied just hours before. "Please. Sit." She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the leather seat. It was the first time they had ever sat as equals, facing each other across the expanse of his desk. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "You were placed in danger because of me. Because of my world." Cassandra shook her head. "You kept your promise. You kept us safe. That's all that matters." He looked at her, at the simple, profound decency that radiated from her. She was like clean water in a poisoned well. And then he did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He told someone the truth. "It was not a car accident," he said, his voice low. "The one that did this to me." Her eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, waiting. "There were 4 of us in the car. My most trusted men. My brothers. We were ambushed. But the shots came from inside the car first. Someone betrayed me. I never knew which one. I've lived for 2 decades not knowing who to hate, so I chose to hate everyone." The confession hung in the air between them, a ghost finally given voice. He had been paralyzed not just by a bullet, but by the poison of suspicion. His isolation wasn't just physical, it was a prison he had built for himself, brick by brick, betrayal by betrayal. "I'm so sorry," she said, and the genuine compassion in her voice was almost his undoing. He simply nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. That conversation was a turning point. A wall had come down, not all at once, but stone by painful stone. Minjun started speaking to Cassandra about more than just household duties. He asked about her day. He asked about Chloe's progress in school. He began to eat his meals in the small, sunny breakfast nook instead of alone in his office, and he requested that she join him. At first, the meals were awkward, filled with long silences. But slowly, a rhythm developed. She would talk about her life before this, about growing up in a crowded, noisy family, about her dreams of one day opening a small bakery. He would listen, a rapt audience of one. In return, he told her stories of his own childhood in Korea, of a poor boy with hungry eyes who clawed his way to the top of a brutal world. He never glorified it. He spoke of it with a kind of detached weariness, like a soldier recounting a war he had survived but not truly won. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden watching Chloe chase a soccer ball, he turned to her. "The physical therapists," he said abruptly. "They all said it was hopeless. The damage to the spinal cord was too severe. They said I would never walk again." Cassandra looked from him to the small, crayon drawing of the walking man, which he had taken from his office and tucked into the side pocket of his wheelchair. "Doctors can be wrong," she said softly. "They're just people. They don't know what's in your heart." He looked down at his own useless legs, at the muscles that had long since wasted away. "There is nothing left. No feeling. Feeling isn't in your legs, Mr. Minjun," she said, her voice firm. "It's in your head. You decide. You've been deciding to sit for 20 years. Maybe you could decide to stand the challenge. So simply put, so utterly audacious, hung in the air. No one had ever dared to suggest he was choosing his condition. They treated his paralysis as an immutable fact, a tragedy to be pitted. But she saw a choice. She saw a man who had surrendered, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of something he had long thought dead, a desire to prove her right. It would be painful, he said, testing the idea, and humiliating. To fail, she reached out, her warm, sturdy hand covering his for just a moment. Then we'll fail, she said. And we'll try again tomorrow. He agreed. He called in the best physical therapist in the country, a stern German woman named Dr. Adler, who looked at Minjun's medical files with deep skepticism. The nerve damage is extensive, she said, her accent sharp. The chances of any significant recovery are less than 1%. I am not paying you for statistics, Minjun replied, his voice flat. I am paying you for the 1%. The work was brutal. It began with hours of painful stretching, forcing atrophied muscles to move, to remember. It involved a complex harness system suspended over a treadmill, where his legs were moved for him, trying to retrain the neural pathways. Minjun, a man whose life was defined by control and the absence of pain inflicted by others, was now utterly dependent, his body pushed and pulled and contorted. He fell. He sweat. He cursed in Korean, his voice raw with agony and frustration. But through it all, Cassandra was there. She was not a nurse or a therapist. She was a witness. She brought him water. She wiped the sweat from his brow. She never offered false praise or empty platitudes. When he would collapse in exhaustion and despair, she would simply say, "Rest. We will try again tomorrow." Chloe was there too. She would sit in the corner of the state-of-the-art gym he had built, coloring, a small, silent cheerleader. Sometimes, after a particularly grueling session, when Minjun was back in his chair, trembling with exhaustion, she would pat his hand. "You did good," she would say. One day, after a month of agonizing effort, something happened. Suspended in the harness, his feet on the unmoving treadmill, Dr. Adler told him to focus. "Think of kicking a ball, Mr. Minjun. Send the message from your brain to your foot." Just think. He closed his eyes, his face a mask of concentration. He thought of Chloe in the garden. He thought of kicking the soccer ball with her. And deep within his right leg, a single muscle twitched. It was a tiny, infinitesimal flicker. But it was real. Dr. Adler gasped. Cassandra, standing by the wall, brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Minjun opened his eyes and looked at her, and in his gaze was a storm of disbelief, pain, and a tiny, fragile spark of hope. Here is the part of the story nobody saw coming. Mr. Park, the loyal head of security, requested a private audience with Cassandra. He was an older man, with a face like a roadmap of a difficult life, and he had served Minjun with unwavering devotion. He met her in the garden, the place where she seemed most at peace. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small, sealed envelope. "The boss does not know I have this. I was the first one on the scene of the accident. I kept it." Inside the envelope was a single, faded photograph. It was a picture of a young, smiling Korean woman, beautiful and full of life. On the back, an inscription was written in Korean. Cassandra couldn't read it. "Who is this?" she asked. "That was Minjun's wife," Mr. Park said, his voice thick with emotion. "And the child she was carrying. They died in the crash. The one that crippled him, the breath left Cassandra's body. The story was so much worse than she had imagined. The betrayal he spoke of," Mr. Park continued, "it wasn't just his men. He believes one of them sold their location to his rivals. But the real betrayal, the one that broke him, was that he couldn't protect his own family. He has been punishing himself for it every day for 20 years. He did not stop trying to walk because of the pain in his legs. He stopped because he did not believe he deserved to." He pointed to the Korean script on the back of the photo. It says, "My love, my legs. You carry our future." He looked at Cassandra, his old eyes filled with a deep, abiding respect. "He has started to live again since you, and the little one arrived. You have given him something to protect. A future to carry." Cassandra looked at the smiling woman in the photograph, then back at the house where a broken man was fighting to stand up. And she finally understood. This wasn't about walking. This was about forgiveness. This was about a man finally giving himself permission to live a life that had not ended on that rainy road 2 decades ago. She tucked the photograph away, a secret she would keep for him, a truth that had finally set everything in its proper place. The final steps would not be his alone. They belonged to the memory of a ghost and the hope of a future embodied by a small girl who believed in impossible things. The next day, she walked into the gym. Minjun was preparing for another session, his face grim with determination. She walked over to him, and before he could ask, she leaned down and kissed his cheek, a simple, gentle press of her lips against his skin.
He froze, stunned.
"What was that for?" he asked, his voice rough. She smiled, a real, radiant smile.
For today, she said.
And for tomorrow, the fight continued, but the despair was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Months turned into a year. The flicker in his muscle became a twitch. The twitch became a tremor. The tremor became a movement. The day finally came when he stood, unassisted, between two parallel bars. His legs shook violently, drenched in sweat, every muscle screaming in protest. But he was standing. He looked across the room at Cassandra and Chloe, who were watching, holding hands. He let go of the left bar, then the right. For 3 seconds, he stood on his own, a titan reborn. Then he took a single, agonizing, miraculous step. And then another. He walked, shuffling and unsteady, the 5 feet between the bars and the woman who had dared him to stand. He reached her and collapsed into her arms, his body trembling, his breath coming in ragged sobs. She held him, her strength surrounding him, and he buried his face in her shoulder.
He was not a gangster.
He was not a boss. He was just a man who had finally, after 20 long years, walked home. The mansion was no longer a cold, silent place. It was filled with the sound of Chloe's laughter, the quiet murmur of conversation, and the slow, deliberate footsteps of a man learning to walk again. Minjun never regained the full use of his legs, but he walked with a cane, his posture proud and straight. He ran his organization with a newfound wisdom, his ruthlessness tempered by a quiet compassion Cassandra had shown him. The drawing Chloe had made remained on his desk, a permanent reminder. One evening, he and Cassandra stood on the balcony, watching the city lights glitter below. Chloe was asleep inside, safe and sound. "I want you to stay," he said, not as a boss to an employee, but as a man to a woman. "Not as my maid, as my partner." As family, Cassandra looked at him, at the man she had pulled back from the brink, and saw not the feared crime lord, but the man who learned to walk again because a little girl drew him a picture. She saw her future. "We're not going anywhere," she said, and slipped her hand into his. "What do you think is the most powerful force for change? Love, hope, or forgiveness? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next story.